Hello humans, my name is Dale Kingsmill. I hope you've been well. I myself have been deep within the minds of getting prepared for a house move and also preparing a bunch of stuff for videos that I hope you will get to see soon. The thing that struck me today is that I won't be bringing this bookshelf with me. And I don't know, I got all like sentimental and nostalgic, and I really wanted to talk about mythology in front of the old girl just one last time. So I tippity typed up a script, but I didn't want to put the teleprompter back on the camera. So we are winging it like the old days. We're going pure old school. I think I should start by removing all these sort of little bitsy bobs. So there's this story from Greek myth that I have wanted to talk about for basically forever, but it's really hard because it's super short. That clock's gotta break. I've always been fascinated by it because it's all vibes. It's like peak vegan evocative. So basically, this takes place right at the end of the timeline of Greek mythology. We're well into the establishment of the Roman Empire. This is where the Rubik's Cube ended up. Way! It's more or less like the last thing to happen, as far as I'm concerned. So we've had the Trojan War, the Odyssey, Rome is fully here, and then around something like AD 14, we get a story about a sailor named Thamus. Ah! Okay. Thamus is sailing past the Isle of Paxos when he hears a divine voice call out to him across the water. It says, "Thamus, spread the word that the great god Pan is dead." And that's it. That's the story. That's the whole story. And so Pan, the god of wild places, is considered dead. From that point on, he's dead. There's no Dionysian resurrection. There's no Titan style hanging around in the background. Pan is just dead. A dead god. All right, Stabitha. It's time to come down now. Show the people your lovely knife one last time. Now, there are a lot of different kind of theories surrounding this story. A lot of people like to argue that it's ultimately about the arrival and spread of Christianity. Because, I mean, around 14 AD, right, the timeline kind of lines up. Another popularized concept is that the voice over the water was actually misheard or mistranslated. Basically, the argument is that there's this Sumerian god named, they've got a lot of names, but one of them is Tammuz. Tammuz is basically Persephone. He's the classic archetype of the dying and reviving god, which we talked about in a video not all that long ago. The argument goes that there was probably a cult of worshippers on this island who were celebrating a ritual recreation of the death of this god, and so they were cheering, "Tammuz, the all great god, is dead." And so the idea is that Tammuz was misheard as Thamus because they sound kind of similar, and that instead of it being about Pan, Pan was being mistranslated. Instead it was Pan like all. The all great god is dead. To be fair, it is a common enough thing. It's not an uncommon thing for there to be ritual recreations of the deaths of gods. Like the Dionysian mysteries involved recreating the story of Dionysus's journey into the underworld and back. Like, that was a thing that people did fairly frequently. Oh, look at that! Speak of the devil, there he is. But I don't know, there's just something about this explanation that kind of rubs me the wrong way. Why did it get so dark? I think one of the main sort of propagators of this idea was Robert Graves, who actually, don't get me wrong, I really like Robert Graves. This copy of Robert Graves' The Greek Myths is probably the book that turned me from person who occasionally accidentally absorbs information about Greek mythology to person who like reads Greek mythology and catalogs information in their brain about it. So Robert Graves, big fan. I need a box. Where's my box? Here's my box. He tells the stories well. He highlights the sort of places where there are discrepancies or similarities with other myths. But as a mythographer, I would say he's quite structuralist, maybe? He has kind of this obsession with figuring out the like real story behind the myths. My hockey stick is propped up in my gold D&D bucket and it slipped and bumped into my skateboard. That's what that noise was. So yeah, Robert Graves just kind of has this obsession with figuring out the like reality, quote unquote, behind myths. And it's something I just can't get behind, you know, because what would Shane Perelman say? He would say we cannot go down into the past like a deep sea diver to see how it was. We can only use the evidence we have, the best evidence we have, to construct the best story that we can. And that, I think that this kind of highlights, I am not a mythographer or a historian, I am just a person who likes stories. Like, I just don't get it when people, and by people I mostly mean Robert Graves, I don't get this need to be like, ah yes, the story of Medusa was probably actually about an all-woman cult of snake worshippers that were defeated. And I'm like, the Greeks had history too. You know what I mean? Like, so much is happening here. What am I gonna do with all these Magic the Gathering cards? I just don't see why we would believe that they would suddenly choose to tell this story from history purely in like an allegorical, metaphorical, mythological format. You know what I mean? There are places where the two genres mix, obviously, like, you know, the Battle of Marathon and Pheidippides, or, I don't know, the Trojan War. They both kind of straddle that line, but I think that's a very different thing from fully replacing an event with make-believe. I don't know, I just feel like it can be very easy to get caught up in searching for the truth and miss that mythology isn't really concerned with that so much, or certainly that it doesn't conceptualize in that same way, and that mythology and history and folklore and religion are all discrete things that bleed into each other, and the story is the story. All of that to say, basically, I just think it's kind of wild to look at pseudo-Plutarch telling this story about another guy, a sailor called Thamus, who heard a divine voice, and to go, oh, well that must have really happened, but because it's real, then it must have been XYZ. We must find a reasonable explanation for it. Like, dog, just embrace the vibes. But the thing that I often think about, the reason that I think the death of Pan sticks so firmly in my head, is because since the beginning, from Prometheus stealing fire, through the Sphinx lurking on the road outside Thebes, to the Caledonian boar hunt, into the Odyssey, Greek mythology has always held a place at its heart for the conflict between civilization and the wilds. The wilderness between Greek city-states were places of incredible danger, places that heroes were needed. These monsters in the myths start encroaching on the countryside, bringing the dangers of the wilderness closer and closer to the population centers, threatening civilization. And I just can't help but think about how the last thing that we hear from Greek mythology as we've moved beyond united but still isolated city-states into a true age of empire, the last thing we hear as civilization firmly establishes itself, confirms itself, is that the great god of wild places is dead. A divine voice over the water, and then nothing. Ever again. Civilization won. It's worth mentioning, I suppose, that worship of Pan didn't cease after this point, in spite of a lack of godly resurrection. To be fair, I don't believe that worship works in such a way as for the death of a god to equate to a death of faith. Also worth mentioning is the question of who was the voice across the water. Who was it that called out to Thamus? I read once, I can't even really remember where, the hint of a suggestion that the voice was somehow Pan himself. I don't know what that means for the story, what that says about his continued presence, whether he's Schrodinger's god, somehow both dead and never-ending. But there's something I just like in that hint of a suggestion, you know? A divine voice calls out across the water, "Tell them, Thamus, that the great god Pan is dead." Ah, that was pretty dramatic, huh? Empty bookshelf. Pew!